Chapter 9. Drug Policy and Law. 9.1 The Evolution of Drug Laws. 9.2 Socio-political aspects of drug legislation. 9.3 The psychology of criminalization and decriminalization. 9.4 International drug policies, an anthropological view. 9.5 The philosophy of punishment and rehabilitation. 9.6 The science of drug detection and analysis. 9.7 Biological arguments in drug policy debates. 9.8 Impacts of legal decisions on drug users. 9.9 Comparing drug policy models. 9.10 Future directions in drug law. 9.1 The evolution of drug laws. Drug policy and law have undergone significant changes over time, reflecting shifting societal values, scientific understanding, and political pressures. These laws dictate the legal framework for the control, distribution, and use of substances classified as drugs, including both medicinal applications and substances that are deemed to have the potential for abuse and addiction. The earliest form of drug regulation can be traced back to various ancient civilizations that established normative guidelines for the use of mind-altering substances for religious or medical purposes. For instance, the Ebers Papyrus, dating back to around 1550 BC in ancient Egypt, contains one of the earliest documented pharmacopoeias with over 700 remedies, indicating the utilization and regulation of medical substances at the time. The concept of drug control remained rudimentary and primarily based on tradition and superstition through the Middle Ages. It was not until the 19th century that drug policy began to evolve into a complex legal issue. With the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and advances in chemistry, new drugs were synthesized, and international trade brought diverse substances into common usage. Opiates, cocaine, and later synthetics, such as barbiturates and amphetamines, became widely available. This availability, and the subsequent rise in drug dependencies, prompted the need for regulation. The United States, for instance, started to regulate narcotics at the federal level, with the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. This legislation was aimed at curbing drug abuse by imposing taxes on the commercial distribution of opiates and coca leaf products. It signified a shift in policy from a laissez-faire attitude toward narcotics to a system of control underpinned by taxation and law enforcement. Following this, the international sphere saw the establishment of the International Opium Convention in 1925, which was one of the first international drug control treaties. It was designed to control the global opium trade. The Geneva Conventions of 1925 and 1931 expanded control to include other narcotics, and the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs further tightened controls and established the International Narcotics Control Board. During the 20th century, as awareness of the social and health impacts of drug abuse grew, so did efforts to strengthen drug laws. In the 1970s, the United States adopted the Controlled Substances Act, CSA, which categorizes drugs into different schedules based on their potential for abuse, safety, and medical use. This allows for regulatory oversight over a wide spectrum of substances and provides a framework for substance regulation that has been adopted in various forms worldwide. Drug policy has continued to evolve, often in response to the challenges posed by new substances and societal trends. For instance, the emergence of designer drugs and synthetics required amendments and updates to existing laws, while debates over marijuana laws have prompted a reevaluation of cannabis prescriptions, resulting in a patchwork of policy approaches, including medicinal, decriminalized, and recreational use statutes across different regions. Contemporary drug policies are also increasingly influenced by public health models. These aim to reduce the harm associated with drug use, offering a contrasting approach to strictly punitive measures. Harm reduction strategies, needle exchange programs, and supervised consumption sites are examples of intervention approaches that are integrated into legal frameworks in various jurisdictions. At the international level, drug policies are negotiated through complex diplomatic efforts reconciling diverse cultural attitudes towards drugs. These policies are shaped by conventions such as the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances and the 1988 Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances, which seek to curtail illicit drug trade while ensuring the availability of drugs for medical and scientific purposes. The evolution of drug laws has been marked by a continual balancing act between control and availability, abuse prevention and medical need, national sovereignty, and international collaboration. The resulting legislation is therefore the product of constantly shifting societal concerns, scientific discoveries, and political negotiations. Continuing challenges such as the opioid crisis, synthetic drug proliferation, and the debate over the decriminalization or legalization of certain drugs ensure that the evolution of drug laws will remain a dynamic and contentious area of public policy. 9.2 Sociopolitical aspects of drug legislation. The sociopolitical aspects of drug legislation are critical, as the laws surrounding the use, distribution, and manufacture of drugs are deeply entrenched in the socioeconomic fabric of societies. Drug policy is shaped by a complex interplay of political, social, and economic factors, and the resulting legislation reflects a society's values, concerns, and approaches to substance use and abuse. Governmental drug policies can influence and reflect public opinions, shape healthcare practices, affect criminal justice systems, and impact international relations. To understand the socio-political implications of drug policies, it is essential to recognize that drug-related legislation often serves multiple objectives. One such objective is public health. Governments strive to protect citizens from the dangerous health effects associated with drug abuse, which includes overdoses, the spread of infectious diseases such as HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis through the sharing of needles, and other health complications. Policies may include measures such as drug education programs, access to treatment services, and regulation of pharmaceuticals to ensure safety and efficacy. Another critical objective is public safety. Drug legislation is often oriented towards reducing the crime that is associated with the drug trade. This includes the enforcement of laws that target the production, trafficking, and sale of illegal substances. The intention is to dismantle drug distribution networks and reduce drug-related violence. Strategies may involve interdiction efforts, the use of undercover operations, and collaboration with international law enforcement agencies. Drug policies also reflect and affect social attitudes and biases. The criminalization of certain drugs can stigmatize users, which may hinder their ability to seek treatment and reintegrate into society. In some cases, drug policy has disproportionately impacted minority and economically disadvantaged groups, causing significant social and racial disparities in arrest and incarceration rates. The consequences of this are widespread, leading to disrupted family structures, reduced employment opportunities, and the perpetuation of poverty cycles. The legal framework governing drugs must balance individual liberty with community interests. Legalization versus prohibition debates often bring into question the extent to which governments should control substances that can be harmful when misused. Proponents of more liberal drug laws argue for the decriminalization or legalization of certain drugs, claiming that such measures can reduce crime, raise government revenues through taxation, and better protect public health through regulation. Critics, however, fear that such policies could normalize drug use and lead to higher rates of addiction. An important aspect of drug legislation is the evolution of drug policy over time. Societal attitudes towards drugs and their use have historically gone through cycles of tolerance and prohibition. The shifts often coincide with changing social mores, scientific discoveries, and political pressures. For example, the alcohol prohibition era in the United States in the 1920s was followed by legalization and regulation. Similarly, the current global trend towards marijuana legalization in some regions reflects a significant shift in social and political attitudes. The enforcement of drug laws has significant implications for the criminal justice system. The allocation of law enforcement resources, the operation of courts, and the management of correctional facilities are all shaped by drug policy. Harsh penalties and mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses have resulted in prison overcrowding, and have called into question the ethics and costs of such policies. There is an ongoing debate about whether drug addiction should be treated as a criminal issue or a health issue. International considerations also play a pivotal role in shaping drug legislation. Drug policy can affect international relations, as drug trafficking often operates across borders. Countries participate in international agreements such as the United Nations Drug Control Conventions, which are aimed at coordinating efforts to combat the global drug trade. However, disparities in drug policies among nations can complicate diplomatic relations and efforts to control the flow of drugs. The economic impact of drug legislation is profound and multifaceted. Government spending on enforcement, the judicial system, and correctional services represents a significant financial outlay. At the same time, the illegal drug trade constitutes a substantial underground economy, which can destabilize legitimate economic activity. Conversely, the legal drug market, including pharmaceuticals and, in some jurisdictions, legalized substances such as cannabis, contributes significantly to economic growth and tax revenues. The developmental dimension of drug policy cannot be ignored. The production and trafficking of narcotics are often intertwined with the socioeconomic development of certain regions. For poverty-stricken areas, the illicit drug trade might present one of the few available means for economic survival. Drug legislation that seeks to criminalize production can have severe repercussions for these communities, potentially escalating cycles of poverty and violence. The socio-political aspects of drug legislation are integral to understanding the multidimensional challenges faced by societies grappling with drug-related issues. Legislation is shaped by and in turn shapes a complex array of societal values, health priorities, safety concerns, economic influences, and international obligations. Any discourse on drug policy must consider these elements to comprehend fully the broad tapestry that characterizes the intersection of drugs, law, and society. Future reforms and policy shifts will inevitably continue to reflect evolving socio-political dynamics, both within individual nations and at the global level. 9.3 The psychology of criminalization and decriminalization. Understanding the psychology behind the criminalization and decriminalization of drugs requires a multifaceted approach involving historical context, societal norms, and the fundamental aspects of human behavior. We examine why societies choose to criminalize certain substances, the psychological impact of these laws on individuals and communities, and the potential effects of shifting towards decriminalization. Historically, drug policies have been influenced by a combination of moral attitudes, political pressures, and economic interests. Criminalization of specific drugs often reflects societal concerns about health, morality, and social order. When a substance is deemed harmful or associated with undesirable behavior, legislation may criminalize its use in an attempt to control its availability and deter use. This approach is predicated on the assumption that prohibition will discourage consumption and protect the public from the drug's perceived dangers. The psychological effect of criminalization on individuals can be profound. Being labeled a criminal for drug possession or use can lead to social stigma and a self-fulfilling prophecy. People may internalize the criminal label, which can negatively impact self-esteem and exacerbate feelings of alienation. The stress and anxiety associated with potential legal repercussions often deter individuals from seeking help for substance misuse, leading to an exacerbation of drug-related problems rather than their resolution. Furthermore, the enforcement of drug laws disproportionately affects certain demographic groups. Marginalized communities, particularly those of lower socioeconomic status and ethnic minorities, tend to experience higher rates of law enforcement encounters, arrests, and convictions related to drug offenses. This selective enforcement not only perpetuates social inequalities, but also erodes trust in legal systems and government institutions. The psychological impact of criminalization extends beyond the individual to the community at large. It can foster environments of fear and suspicion, as well as cultivate underground markets where drugs are distributed through unregulated channels, often associated with violence and crime. These conditions undermine community cohesion and safety, contrary to the supposed goal of drug prohibition. On the other hand, decriminalization represents a shift away from punitive measures towards a more public health-oriented approach. By decriminalizing the possession of small quantities of drugs, resources can be redirected from law enforcement to education, treatment, and harm reduction services. This shift recognizes drug use as a complex issue that cannot be adequately addressed through criminal justice measures alone. The decriminalization of drugs often leads to a reduction in the stigma associated with their use. As the threat of criminal sanctions is removed, individuals are more likely to approach health services for support with drug-related issues. This improved access to support can facilitate recovery, reduce harm, and ultimately lead to better health outcomes for individuals who use drugs. Decriminalization can also affect societal attitudes towards drug users, moving from viewing them as criminals to seeing them as individuals in need of care. This transformation can promote compassion and understanding within a community, fostering a more inclusive and supportive environment for everyone involved. It can also help to rebuild public trust in legal systems and authorities, as policies become more aligned with principles of justice and equity. The economics of decriminalization is another crucial aspect. The criminal justice system incurs significant costs in arresting, prosecuting, and incarcerating individuals for drug offenses. By reallocating these funds towards education and healthcare, governments can use their resources more efficiently while improving public health and safety outcomes. Additionally, decriminalization can weaken illegal drug markets, reducing the associated criminal activities. Finally, it's important to explore the evidence from countries and states that have implemented decriminalization policies. Studies from these regions can provide insight into the real-world effects of such policies, including changes in drug use patterns, health outcomes, and crime rates. This empirical data is vital when considering reforms to existing drug laws and can guide future policy decisions. The psychological ramifications of criminalization and decriminalization are broad and significant. While criminalization can have detrimental effects on individuals and communities, decriminalization offers a more humane and effective approach to managing drug-related issues. Policy decisions in this arena have far-reaching implications, and only by carefully considering the psychological aspects can we develop strategies that are both compassionate and pragmatic in addressing the challenges posed by drug use. 9.4 International Drug Policies, an Anthropological View. The international landscape of drug policies has evolved significantly over the past decades, shaped by a multitude of factors including economic interests, cultural beliefs, historical trajectories, and global politics. Anthropologists have taken interest in how societies conceptualize and govern drug use, as it offers profound insight into cultural values and social structures. By examining drug policies through an anthropological lens, one can reveal the intricate ways in which nations approach issues surrounding illicit substances, including the methods by which they categorize, regulate, and penalize drug-related activities. Drug policy varies greatly from one country to the next, often reflecting a society's attitudes towards health, morality, and public order. For instance, some nations adopt a punitive approach, implementing strict laws that criminalize drug possession and distribution. These laws are often supported by a belief in maintaining social order and deterring illicit behavior through severe penalties. Anthropological research indicates that, in these contexts, drugs are frequently viewed as a threat to the cohesive social fabric, and the state's role is seen as protecting citizens from this perceived danger. Other societies opt for harm reduction strategies, which prioritize the health and well-being of individuals over punitive measures. In such models, the focus is on minimizing the negative consequences of drug use rather than on enforcing abstinence. This approach is often associated with a recognition of drug use as a part of human behavior that cannot be completely eradicated. Through this lens, policies may include needle exchange programs, safe consumption sites, and substitution therapies, which are designed to reduce the harm associated with drug use both for individuals and for society at large. In some countries, decriminalization of drug possession for personal use is a significant component of policy. This does not mean that drugs are legal, but rather that the act of possessing small quantities is no longer treated as a criminal offense, but as an administrative one. Anthropologists have observed that in countries with decriminalization policies, there is often an increased focus on addiction treatment and rehabilitation, suggesting a move towards understanding drug abuse as a health issue rather than solely a legal problem. Portugal is frequently cited as a successful case study in decriminalization, as it shifted its emphasis from incarceration to a health-based model. The legalization of certain drugs, most notably cannabis, represents a drastic shift in some countries' drug policies. Legalization efforts often arise from a combination of public opinion shifts, economic prospects, and evidence from scientific research on the relative harms of the drug compared to legal substances like alcohol and tobacco. Anthropologists note that legalization policies can lead to the transformation of a drug from a stigmatized substance into a commercial product. Moreover, the regulation and taxation of such drugs can create new revenue streams for governments. This transition from an illegal to a legal market can have profound cultural implications, influencing public opinion, consumption patterns, and law enforcement practices. International drug policies are also influenced by global agreements and transnational bodies such as the United Nations. The UN's drug control conventions are key documents that outline international norms and aim to establish a collective approach to controlling narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. Nations that are signatories to these conventions commit to adhering to certain principles and policy frameworks, which can then shape their own national laws. Anthropologists highlight that these conventions mirror a broader global consensus on drug policy, but they also acknowledge the contention and debate around these agreements, reflecting divergent cultural, social, and political perspectives. Anthropological research has shed light on the role of socioeconomic factors in shaping drug policies. Poverty, unemployment, and education levels have been linked to drug abuse and trafficking. Nations with significant economic disparities often struggle with higher rates of drug-related issues, which influences their policy decisions. An anthropological view recognizes the complexity of these social determinants and advocates for comprehensive approaches that address underlying socioeconomic conditions alongside drug-specific interventions. The intersection of drug policy with race and ethnicity has become an area of intense study for anthropologists. In many countries, drug laws have disproportionately impacted certain ethnic groups, leading to higher rates of arrest and incarceration among these populations. Investigations into the reasons behind these disparities often reveal historical prejudices and institutional biases. As a consequence, a growing movement calls for drug policy reform to address these injustices. Recognition of these biases is crucial for creating equitable drug policies that serve all segments of society. Anthropologists have also considered the historical context of drug policies, tracing the origins of certain laws and norms to previous cultural and political periods. The colonial history of some nations, for instance, has influenced their contemporary drug laws, as colonial powers often impose their own narcotics regulations on colonized societies. The resulting policies may have had little consideration for the indigenous practices or traditional uses of psychoactive substances, leading to cultural disruptions that persist to this day. Gender is another aspect of drug policy that anthropologists have scrutinized. Men and women can experience the effects of drug policies differently due to varying social roles, drug use patterns, and vulnerabilities to substance abuse. Women in particular may face unique challenges such as stigma during pregnancy or difficulty accessing treatment due to caregiving responsibilities. In response, some argue for gender-sensitive drug policies that account for these distinct needs and experiences. Finally, An anthropological perspective on international drug policies recognizes the dynamic and interconnected nature of drug-related issues, which cannot be solved through isolated interventions. Policies must be adaptable and informed by ongoing research into the social, cultural, and economic contexts of drug use. Transnational cooperation, the exchange of evidence-based best practices, and the respect for cultural diversity are paramount for effective international drug policymaking. As nations continue to experiment with and reformulate their drug policies, anthropologists will play a valuable role in documenting these changes and in contributing to a nuanced understanding of how societies manage the challenges associated with drug use. An anthropological view of international drug policies draws attention to the diverse ways in which societies interact with and regulate psychoactive substances. Through careful observation and analysis, anthropologists provide insight into the complex tapestry of cultural beliefs, historical experiences, economic motivations, and social policies that shape global approaches to drug use. Such a comprehensive perspective is essential for designing humane, effective, and culturally sensitive drug policies that can address the multifaceted nature of drug-related issues worldwide. 9.5 The philosophy of punishment and rehabilitation. The philosophical underpinnings of drug policy form a complex web of moral, social, and political considerations that has evolved significantly over time. The debate between punishment and rehabilitation in the context of drug law is particularly contentious, reflecting a tension between the desire to deter drug use and the need to treat drug addiction. The purpose of this section is to explore these philosophies and their implications for drug policy. The concept of punishment for drug offenses is historically rooted in the idea of deterrence. Deterrence is based on the assumption that the threat of punishment will prevent individuals from engaging in illegal drug use or trade. Punishment can take many forms, including fines, incarceration, and community service. The goal is to create a consequence severe enough to outweigh the perceived benefits of drug use. Proponents argue that this approach protects society by discouraging dangerous behaviors and upholding the rule of law. They often emphasize the importance of maintaining social order and the potential harms associated with drug use, such as crime and health risks. Critics of punishment-based approaches, however, point out several issues. One of the key criticisms is that punishment alone does not address the underlying reasons why individuals turn to drugs, such as poverty, lack of education, or mental health issues. Punitive measures may also disproportionately affect marginalized communities, exacerbating social inequality. In addition, high incarceration rates for drug offenses can strain the criminal justice system and lead to prison overcrowding. Furthermore, evidence suggests that harsh punishments do not necessarily equate to lower rates of drug use, calling into question the effectiveness of this strategy. On the opposing end of the spectrum is the philosophy of rehabilitation. This approach views drug addiction primarily as a public health issue rather than a criminal one. The focus of rehabilitation is to provide individuals with the support and treatment they need to overcome addiction. This may include medical interventions, counseling, vocational training, and other support services. Advocates of rehabilitation argue that treating drug addiction can reduce the likelihood of relapse and help integrate individuals back into society as productive members. Rehabilitation-oriented policies often incorporate harm reduction strategies. Harm reduction accepts that drug use is a part of our society, but aims to minimize the negative consequences associated with it. This can involve providing safe consumption spaces, needle exchange programs, and access to addiction treatment services. Proponents suggest that such measures can reduce the spread of infectious diseases, lower the incidence of overdose deaths, and improve the overall health outcomes of drug users. Integration of punishment and rehabilitation into drug policies varies by jurisdiction and reflects broader societal values. Some countries adhere strictly to punitive measures, while others have moved towards a more rehabilitative model. There is also a growing trend of exploring restorative justice approaches, which aim to address the harm caused by drug offenses through reconciliation and reparation rather than punishment. Contemporary debates around drug policy often involve a reassessment of past approaches. There is an ongoing discussion about the decriminalization or legalization of certain drugs, influenced by a reevaluation of the risks and benefits of these substances. Legalization could potentially reduce the burden on the criminal justice system and generate tax revenue. However, it also raises concerns about regulation, public safety, and the potential for increased drug use. Cost-effectiveness is another factor that shapes drug policy. Punitive measures tend to be more costly than rehabilitative approaches when considering the long-term expenses of incarceration and the indirect costs associated with lost productivity and social disruption. Rehabilitation and harm reduction strategies, although initially requiring investment in support services, may ultimately lead to more sustainable outcomes for individuals and society. The philosophy of punishment has been criticized for failing to take into account the individual backgrounds and circumstances of drug offenders. Rehabilitation, contrastingly, emphasizes personalized treatment plans tailored to each person's needs. This personalized approach is increasingly recognized as important for addressing the complex and multifaceted nature of drug addiction. The debate between punishment and rehabilitation in drug policy is informed by a variety of philosophical considerations. These include understandings of deterrence, the nature of addiction, social justice, public health, economic factors, and the capacity for individual change. Drug policies based on punishment have been criticized for their effectiveness and fairness, while rehabilitative and harm reduction strategies are seen as more humane and potentially more successful in dealing with drug problems. As societal attitudes towards drugs continue to evolve, so too will the philosophies that guide our approaches to drug policy and law. 9.6 The science of drug detection and analysis. The field of drug detection and analysis plays a critical role in enforcing drug policies and laws. It involves a variety of scientific techniques and methodologies to identify the presence and concentration of drugs and their metabolites in biological specimens and in the environment. This process is key in forensic toxicology, therapeutic drug monitoring, doping control in sports, and workplace drug testing. These detection methods must be precise, accurate, and legally defensible, as they may be used as evidence in legal proceedings. One well-established technique for drug analysis is immunoassay. Immunoassays are biochemical tests that measure the presence or concentration of a substance by its reactivity with a specific antibody. These tests are commonly used for preliminary drug screening because they are quick and can be done in large quantities at relatively low cost. However, immunoassays can sometimes produce false positive or false negative results due to cross-reactivity with substances structurally similar to the target drug. Therefore, they are often followed by more specific confirmation tests. Confirmation tests for drug detection generally employ chromatographic techniques coupled with mass spectrometry, MS. Gas chromatography, GC, or liquid chromatography, LC, separates the various components of a sample. Following chromatographic separation, mass spectrometry can identify and quantify the drugs based on the molecular weight and structure of the ions. GC-MS and LC megasiemens per megasiemens tandem mass spectrometry are considered the gold standards for confirmatory testing because of their high specificity and sensitivity. The data they produce are detailed and can differentiate between drugs and other structurally similar compounds. Sample collection for drug detection and analysis is an important procedure that requires adherence to strict protocols. Biological samples such as blood, urine, hair, saliva, or sweat are typically collected because they can contain parent drugs and their metabolites. The choice of specimen depends on the drug's pharmacokinetics, including its absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Each type of biological sample offers different windows of detection. Urine is commonly used for its ease of collection and because it shows drugs used over the past few days. Blood provides a shorter detection window but reflects active influence of the drug, and hair can provide information about drug use over months. Urine drug testing is often employed due to its non-invasive collection and the broad window of detection it offers. Enzyme multiplied immunoassay technique, EMIT, and radioimmunoassay, RIA, are among the most commonly used immunoassays in urine screening. These tests detect the presence of drug metabolites, which are the result of the body's metabolic processes on the drug compound. After immunoassay screening, positive samples usually go through confirmation testing to rule out any interference or false positives by other substances. Hair analysis is another tool in the arsenal of drug detection, offering a long window of detection. Drugs and their metabolites are incorporated into hair from the bloodstream, and they remain locked in the hair as it grows. Analysis of hair samples can provide a historical record of drug use that spans months, depending on the length of the hair. However, external contamination, hair color, and cosmetic treatments can influence the results, which must be considered during analysis and interpretation. Blood and saliva are other matrices that provide insight into more recent drug use. Blood testing is invasive, but can offer real-time data on drug levels in the bloodstream. This type of analysis is most commonly used in situations that require confirmation of current impairment, such as in cases of driving under the influence of drugs. Saliva testing is less invasive than blood testing and offers a detection window somewhere between blood and urine. Like blood, saliva mainly contains the parent drug rather than metabolites, which can be a more accurate reflection of recent usage. Advancements in technology are continuously improving the sensitivity and specificity of drug detection methods. Newer analytical techniques, such as high-resolution mass spectrometry, HRMS, are being developed to screen for a wider range of substances in a single analysis, including novel psychoactive substances, NPS, which may not be detectable by standard assays. Such advancements allow forensic laboratories to stay ahead in the race against the continuous emergence of new drugs on the market. Quality control and quality assurance are integral to the science of drug detection and analysis. Laboratories conducting these tests adhere to strict regulatory standards to ensure the reliability and integrity of test results. Programs such as proficiency testing, where laboratories analyze blind samples of known content, are common practices to maintain accuracy. This is essential because the consequences of false positives or negatives can be significant in legal and medical contexts. The results could influence the outcome of court cases, employment status, or professional sports careers. Drug detection and analysis is a multifaceted scientific field that is foundational to drug policy and law enforcement. It employs a diverse array of techniques, from initial screening using immunoassays to confirmatory testing with GCMS or LC megasiemens per megasiemens. Each method has its particular strengths and is appropriate for different scenarios and substances. The vigilance in sample collection, advances in analytical methods, and strict adherence to quality control ensure that the results are accurate and legally defensible. These efforts collectively support the implementation and enforcement of drug policies, thereby contributing to public safety and well-being. 9.7 Biological Arguments in Drug Policy Debates. The discourse around drug policy often incorporates a myriad of perspectives, with biological arguments forming a crucial point of debate. Biological arguments consider the physiological impacts of drugs on individuals and the implications for regulation and legislation. It is essential to understand that these biological effects can vary significantly across different substances and are influenced by factors such as dosage, frequency of use, and individual physiology. One of the fundamental biological arguments in drug policy is the potential for addiction. The addictive nature of certain substances is a key concern for policymakers, as the propensity for dependency can lead to a wide range of social and healthcare problems. Drugs that are highly addictive can compel users to prioritize their drug use over other aspects of their lives, potentially leading to job loss, breakdown of family relationships, and increased healthcare costs due to the need for addiction treatment and associated medical issues. The concept of neuroplasticity is central to understanding addiction and is often highlighted in policy debates. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to adapt and change its function in response to repeated exposure to stimuli, such as drugs. Substances that are prone to cause addiction can alter brain chemistry in ways that reinforce drug-seeking behaviors. This biological propensity for certain substances to induce addictive behaviors is a substantial justification for their regulation or prohibition. On the other hand, a counter-argument often presented is that not everyone who uses addictive substances becomes addicted. This suggests that biological predispositions, such as genetic factors, play a role in an individual's susceptibility to addiction. Recognizing these differences can lead to more targeted and personalized drug policies that consider the risk profile of the individual, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. Another biological argument involves the medicinal properties of certain controlled substances. Drugs that are subject to regulatory debate, such as cannabis or psychedelics, possess compounds that have been shown to have therapeutic benefits for specific conditions. For instance, cannabinoids have been found effective in managing chronic pain and reducing the frequency of seizures in certain types of epilepsy. These biological benefits compel advocates to push for policy reforms that would make such substances more accessible for medical use. However, the recognition of medicinal benefits also highlights the need for regulation to ensure safety and efficacy. Strict controls are needed to regulate the production, prescribing, and distribution of substances with medical applications to prevent misuse and ensure patients receive standardized quality treatments. Policymakers must consider the balance between providing access to potentially beneficial compounds and safeguarding against the risks associated with drug abuse. Furthermore, arguments related to drug toxicity and harm potential play a significant role in policy formulation. Some substances have a narrow therapeutic index, meaning there is a small margin between the dose that produces a therapeutic effect and the dose that can cause harm or even be lethal. Drugs that pose a high risk of overdose or cause significant physiological harm are often heavily regulated or banned to protect public health. It is also paramount to consider the chronic effects that drugs can have on the human body. Long-term drug use can lead to a wide array of health issues, such as cardiovascular diseases, liver damage, and cognitive impairment. These long-term effects provide a biological rationale for prevention efforts and policies aimed at reducing the consumption of harmful substances. The developmental impact of drug exposure is a critical biological argument, particularly with respect to prenatal and adolescent drug exposure. Substances that can cause developmental defects or impede normal brain development are of particular concern. Discussions surrounding the legal status of drugs often involve considerations of age restrictions to prevent use during these critical periods of development. Another aspect of biological arguments in drug policy is the potential for drug interactions. As polypharmacy becomes more common, particularly among those with chronic illnesses, understanding how different substances interact with one another is important. Adverse drug interactions can result in serious health complications. Therefore, laws and regulations may be geared towards minimizing the risk of dangerous interactions by controlling the availability of certain substances and ensuring that healthcare providers have sufficient knowledge to manage these risks. Biological arguments are a vital component of drug policy debates. They encompass the multifaceted ramifications of drug use and abuse on individual health and society at large. Policymakers need to carefully consider the complex biological dimensions of these substances when crafting laws and regulations. This includes not only the potential risks, but also the possible medical benefits and the need for a nuanced approach to addressing addiction and other drug-related harms. By grounding drug policies in scientific evidence and understanding of biological effects, more effective and justifiable policies can be developed to regulate the use of drugs in society. 9.8 Impacts of legal decisions on drug users. Legal decisions surrounding drug policy have far-reaching consequences that impact drug users, their families, and society at large. Drawing boundaries between legal and illegal substances determines not just which substances are accessible, but also influences public attitudes, funding decisions for drug treatment and prevention, and law enforcement priorities. These decisions profoundly affect the daily lives of individuals who use drugs, whether for medicinal or non-medicinal purposes. When a substance is deemed illegal, the consequences for individuals caught possessing, manufacturing, or distributing it can be severe. Criminalization of drug possession often leads to incarceration, with a consequent loss of employment, social standing, and future opportunities. This punitive approach can have cascading effects, including destabilization of families and increased financial strain. Additionally, criminal records can hinder efforts to secure employment or housing, further marginalizing impacted individuals. The legal environment also shapes the quality and safety of drugs. Illegality often forces production and distribution into unregulated markets, where substances may be adulterated with dangerous fillers or sold at varying levels of purity. Users of these substances face increased risks of overdose and exposure to impurities that can lead to additional health complications. Conversely, when drugs are regulated, authorities can implement safety measures to ensure product consistency and to inform users about potential risks. The shift toward decriminalization or legalization of certain drugs in various jurisdictions has been associated with changes in societal perceptions and user behavior. For example, decriminalization often results in increased funding for drug education and treatment programs. This can lead to greater awareness of the risks associated with drug use and, ideally, a reduction in harmful behaviors. Moreover, treatment is prioritized over punishment, potentially leading to better health outcomes for individuals struggling with addiction. Legal decisions also influence research into potentially beneficial uses of drugs. Many substances that have been classified as illegal carry possible therapeutic benefits when used appropriately. Restrictions on these drugs limit scientific research and can delay the development of valuable medications. By re-evaluating the legal status of certain drugs, policymakers can foster an environment supportive of medical advancements and innovation. Enforcement of drug laws disproportionately impacts marginalized communities, often exacerbating social inequalities. Communities of color and low-income neighborhoods are frequently subject to higher levels of drug enforcement, and consequently experience higher rates of incarceration for drug offenses. These discriminatory practices can reinforce cycles of poverty and social disenfranchisement, increasing the difficulties drug users from these communities face in attempting to access support and resources. The legal treatment of drug users also affects public health outcomes. Policies that facilitate the use of safe injection sites and syringe exchange programs have been shown to reduce rates of infectious disease transmission among drug users. Where such policies are not in place, individuals may engage in riskier consumption practices, with resultant health complications that extend to the wider community. Another impact of legal decisions is the influence on the availability of harm reduction services. Legislation that penalizes possession of drug paraphernalia can deter users from accessing clean needles and other safe usage tools, leading to increases in drug-related harm. By adopting a harm reduction approach, legal frameworks can align more closely with public health objectives, emphasizing the reduction of negative consequences associated with drug use. International law and bilateral agreements also shape domestic drug policies. The influence of international drug control treaties can pressure countries to adopt strict prohibitionist policies, which may not align with their national interests or public health priorities. Compliance with these agreements can limit a country's ability to enact progressive policies that benefit drug users and address their specific needs. Finally, legal decisions that foster a stigmatizing environment contribute to an atmosphere of fear and ostracism for drug users. Stigma affects not only the willingness of individuals to seek help for their drug use, but also influences societal attitudes, potentially perpetuating misinformation and prejudice. Policies grounded in compassion and understanding can lead to more integrated and effective approaches to addressing the challenges faced by drug users. Legal decisions related to drug policy are not made in a vacuum. They are informed by cultural, social, and political contexts, and can be influenced by public opinion and activism. Consequently, ongoing dialogue and assessment of the impacts of these laws are crucial in ensuring that policies serve the best interests of public health and the rights of individuals. Ongoing reviews and reforms are essential to address the complex realities faced by drug users and to minimize the unintended negative consequences that these legal decisions can produce. 9.9 Comparing drug policy models. Drug policies are the legal frameworks that govern the control and management of substances considered psychoactive and potentially harmful. These policies vary significantly from one country to another and are based on historical, cultural, political, and scientific factors. This chapter aims to compare different drug policy models, highlighting their characteristics, rationale, outcomes, and potential shortcomings. By analyzing various approaches, we can gain a better understanding of how drug policies impact society and contribute to the global discussion on drug control and management. One prevalent model is the prohibitionist approach, which strictly criminalizes the production, distribution, and possession of drugs categorized as illicit. Countries such as the United States have historically championed this strategy, emphasizing a war on drugs that prioritizes law enforcement, interdiction, and punitive measures against drug offenders. The rationale behind this model is that stringent laws and tough enforcement will deter drug use, trafficking, and related criminal activities. However, critics argue that the prohibitionist model has led to mass incarceration, disproportionately affected marginalized communities, and failed to significantly reduce drug prevalence or addiction rates. In contrast, harm reduction models prioritize public health over criminal justice responses to drug use. Harm reduction strategies involve needle exchange programs, opioid substitution therapy with medications like methadone, and safe consumption spaces. The underlying principle is to reduce the adverse health, social, and economic consequences of drug use without necessarily requiring abstinence. Countries like Portugal, which decriminalized the personal use of all drugs in 2001, embrace harm reduction as a central component of their drug policy. Evidence from these jurisdictions suggests that harm reduction can decrease HIV/AIDS transmission, overdose deaths, and lower overall levels of drug-related harm. Another model is the medicalization of certain drugs, where substances are viewed through a medical lens and prescribed or managed by healthcare professionals. For example, in countries that have medical cannabis programs, patients with qualifying conditions can legally access cannabis-derived treatments. The argument for medicalization is that it recognizes the potential therapeutic benefits of some substances that are otherwise illegal and provides a regulatory framework for their controlled use. One of the challenges with the medicalization model is ensuring that access to treatment is balanced with preventing misuse and diversion, since these substances often still have the potential for abuse. Legalization is another approach that has been gaining traction in various regions, particularly concerning cannabis. In legalization models, the production, sale, and use of certain drugs are regulated by the state. Countries like Canada and Uruguay, and some states within the United States, have enacted cannabis legalization with varying regulations. The purpose of legalization is to eliminate black market activities, ensure product quality and safety, and generate tax revenue from legal sales. Regulated legalization allows for government oversight and quality control, but it also requires comprehensive strategies to address potential increases in use and societal impacts, especially among young people. The zero-tolerance model, often associated with countries such as Singapore or Malaysia, imposes severe penalties, including the death penalty, for drug trafficking. This model operates under the belief that the threat of harsh punishment will act as a deterrent to prevent individuals from engaging in drug-related activities. While zero-tolerance policies are credited with maintaining low drug use rates in certain countries, they raise significant human rights concerns and questions about the ethical implications of such severe punitive measures. Switzerland's approach focuses on providing comprehensive treatment, including prescription heroin programs for long-term addicts who have not benefited from other treatments. This policy aims at improving the health outcomes of the most vulnerable drug users, reducing illicit drug consumption, and combating drug-related crime. Swiss drug policy has been recognized for decreasing drug deaths, HIV rates, and improving social integration of drug users. Critics of this approach often argue about the ethical considerations of prescribing addictive substances, while proponents point to the pragmatic health and social benefits. In Scandinavia, countries such as Sweden adopt a restrictive policy that emphasizes prevention, control, and a clear opposition to drug legalization. The Swedish model relies heavily on education and early intervention, alongside criminal penalties for drug offenses. This approach has achieved relatively low drug use rates, but at the same time, some criticize it for stigmatizing users and not providing adequate harm reduction services. The Netherlands is known for its pragmatic policies that distinguish between soft and hard drugs. Cannabis is tolerated in controlled environments such as coffee shops, while hard drugs remain illegal. This bifurcated approach aims to separate markets and reduce the harms associated with harder drugs. Critics argue that this has led to a backdoor problem where production and supply are unregulated despite controlled sales, whereas supporters claim that it has prevented the escalation of use and maintained public order. In Latin America, some countries have been reconsidering their drug policies in light of the devastating effects of drug trafficking and violence. Initiatives that question the effectiveness of prohibition include calls for the decriminalization of certain drugs or the reevaluation of international drug treaties. These discussions indicate a shift towards exploring alternatives that could decrease violence and weaken the power of drug cartels. Finally, examining international drug policy models would not be complete without understanding the role of global conventions. The United Nations Drug Control Conventions provide the international legal framework for drug control, requiring member states to enact measures against drug abuse and illicit trafficking. However, these conventions are often criticized for lacking flexibility and not adequately addressing the varying realities of member nations. With the growing number of countries exploring and implementing novel drug policies, there are increasing calls for international policy reform that accommodates a wider breadth of approaches and respects national sovereign rights to manage public health issues. The comparison of drug policy models around the world shows a spectrum of strategies, each with its set of philosophies, objectives, and results. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to drug policy. The effectiveness of any given model depends on various factors including societal norms, resources, and cultural attitudes towards drugs and those who use them. As the global dialogue on drug policies continues, it is crucial that countries share information and learn from each other's experiences to develop policies that not only curb drug-related problems, but also protect public health, human rights, and social well-being. 9.10 Future Directions in Drug Law. The realm of drug policy and law is continually evolving as societal values shift and new research emerges. Future directions in drug law are not only shaped by scientific understanding of substance effects, but also by public health perspectives, economic considerations, and human rights principles. In many countries, the primary focus of drug legislation has been on prohibition and criminalization, which has led to extensive and costly law enforcement efforts. However, there is an increasing recognition that this approach has not effectively reduced drug abuse or the black market supply of drugs. Consequently, legislators and policymakers are beginning to explore alternative strategies that might more effectively reduce harm, promote public health, and uphold justice. One of the critical areas of future policy development is likely to involve a reassessment of drug classification systems. Present systems are often criticized for lack of flexibility and inconsistency with scientific evidence. For instance, certain substances with high potential for medical use are restricted under stringent drug schedules, limiting research and therapeutic potential. Modernizing classification systems might focus on reflecting a substance's relative harms, including the risks of addiction and drug interactions, its medicinal benefits, and its social and economic impact. The intention behind revamping these classifications would be to enable a more rational, evidence-based approach that could guide both law enforcement priorities and medical research directions. Another prospective shift in drug policy may be a movement toward decriminalization or legalization of certain drugs, which has already begun in some jurisdictions for substances like cannabis. Decriminalization typically involves removing criminal penalties for possession and sometimes small-scale distribution of drugs, while legalization also establishes a regulated market for production and sale. These changes are rooted in the belief that criminalization contributes to overburdened justice systems, fosters social inequalities, and fails to address the underlying causes of drug abuse. Decriminalization and legalization can redirect resources from prosecution and incarceration towards education, addiction treatment, and harm reduction services. Harm reduction strategies are expected to play a prominent role in future drug laws and policies. Harm reduction refers to policies and programs designed to mitigate the negative consequences associated with drug use, without necessarily reducing drug consumption itself. These may include needle exchange programs, supervised consumption sites, and the distribution of overdose reversal medications. Governments are beginning to recognize that harm reduction services can save lives, reduce the spread of infectious diseases, and offer pathways to treatment for people who use drugs. As such, future laws may increasingly support harm reduction initiatives as part of a broader public health strategy. As part of a comprehensive approach, the development of new legal frameworks is likely to favor drug addiction treatment and recovery programs over punitive measures. The recognition that addiction is a medical condition, not a moral failing, is prompting changes to ensure individuals have access to evidence-based treatments such as medication-assisted therapy, MAT, and psychosocial interventions. Legal reforms may mandate coverage for treatment services within health insurance plans, or require that criminal justice systems refer individuals with substance use disorders to treatment rather than jail. Measures like these aim to address the root causes of drug dependency and promote long-term recovery. Technological advances are also expected to influence future drug policies. The growth of digital platforms and big data analytics can enhance drug monitoring systems and inform targeted interventions. For instance, prescription drug monitoring programs, PDMPs, can prevent prescription fraud and identify at-risk individuals for early intervention. Legislators might create laws that enhance the use of technology in monitoring prescription drugs, detect illegal online sales, and identify new psychoactive substances that are not yet regulated. Technology can improve the speed and accuracy of policy responses to emerging drug trends. International cooperation will be crucial in the development of future drug laws. Drug trafficking often crosses borders, and global trends can influence drug use and policy. International treaties and conventions have historically shaped national drug laws. However, as countries experiment with new approaches such as cannabis legalization, existing international frameworks may come under pressure to evolve. Future drug policies may require global dialogue and a reconceptualization of international drug control agreements to better align with diverse national policies that prioritize health outcomes and human rights. Drug laws in the future may also need to address the environmental impacts of drug cultivation and production. The illegal production of drugs like cannabis and cocaine has contributed to deforestation, pollution, and biodiversity loss in various parts of the world. Legal frameworks could be designed to promote sustainable production practices and reduce the environmental footprint of both legal and illegal drug markets. Regulations may enforce environmental standards and offer incentives for environmentally friendly production methods, striking a balance between achieving drug control objectives and protecting the environment. The incorporation of human rights perspectives into drug laws is an emerging focus. Draconian drug laws have sometimes led to human rights abuses, including disproportionate sentencing and extrajudicial punishments. We can expect to see a stronger push towards drug policies that respect human dignity, offer protection against discrimination, and ensure that individuals who use drugs have access to healthcare and social services. Legal reforms may involve reviewing sentencing guidelines to avoid overly punitive measures for nonviolent drug offenses and may include measures to end the death penalty for drug-related crimes in the jurisdictions where it persists. In anticipation of future challenges, policymakers and lawmakers will likely investigate adaptive legal frameworks that can evolve alongside changing social attitudes and scientific discoveries. This may involve creating legislative mechanisms that enable periodic review and amendment of drug laws based on predetermined criteria, such as public health indicators and social outcomes. The objective is to have drug laws that can rapidly adapt to new evidence about drugs' risks and benefits, shifts in public opinion, or other relevant developments, allowing for more responsive and informed drug policy. By keeping an eye on these developments, it is clear that the future directions in drug law are poised to foster a more nuanced, health-centered, and just approach to the challenges posed by drug use and abuse. A flexible framework that aligns with contemporary values and scientific knowledge will better serve individuals and societies, making drug policies more effective and equitable in the years to come.